Suddenly, Donald Trump is talking about our campaign. Suddenly, the Republican National Committee is tweeting about our campaign. Suddenly, we have the Democratic establishment very nervous about this campaign. We got Wall Street nervous. We got the insurance companies nervous. We got the drug companies nervous. We got the fossil fuel industry nervous. We got the military-industrial complex nervous. We got the prison-industrial complex nervous. We got billionaires going on television crying that they're going to have to start paying their fair share of taxes. And they're starting to think, could this really happen? Could there really be a political movement in America which brings together blacks and whites and Latinos and Asian Americans and Native Americans, gay and straight, to stand up as working class people fighting for change? We are their worst nightmare.
We are their worst nightmare. That was Bernie Sanders last night at an electric rally in Sioux City, Iowa, speaking the absolute truth. That however much the elite, the rich and wealthy and well-connected, have disliked and feared Bernie Sanders over the past years and decades, it's at this particular moment that they're truly terrified, because there's a growing belief, not just from Bernie supporters, but from Bernie's enemies, that he might actually win this thing, that he might win the nomination, that he might win the presidency, that he might be given the power to start building a truly just, dignified, and humane society, not just for the rich, but for every single American. And they're losing it. Donald Trump is losing it. The Democratic Party establishment is losing it. The fossil fuel companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies and the military-industrial complex companies, they're all losing it as well. Billionaires, as Bernie notes, are going on TV crying because they don't want to pay their fair share in wealth and other forms of taxes. And this is all because Bernie Sanders is surging in the polls. Bernie Sanders is raising the most money from the most donations and the most donors, under $20 on average per person. Bernie Sanders is building the sort of movement that terrifies people, both in the policies he holds and how he does politics. He does politics successfully and without the money of the rich and wealthy and well-connected. He's not bought. He can't be bought. He won't be bought. And that means that, my goodness, if he wins, he'll actually represent working class people. He'll actually represent the regular people of this country, instead of just saying it to win the election and then going back on that promise as soon as he's in the Oval Office. The rich people, they understand this. They know that this is not an election per usual. This is not the sort of election where they'll have the Democrat and the Republican bought and paid for before the votes are even cast. If Bernie Sanders wins the nomination, and he may well win the nomination, it's becoming realer and realer by the minute, then they fear that Bernie Sanders will actually implement a social and economic, environmental, and political program that benefits the many and not the few. That's why regular people, Bernie Sanders' movement, are their worst nightmare. And Bernie Sanders makes a great point here as well. And this is one of the reasons why Martin Luther King, for instance, terrified people. It wasn't just his rhetoric. It wasn't just his fight for racial and economic justice. It was that he combined those things. It's that he had the potential to build a multilateral, multi-generational, multiracial, multi-class movement. And in many ways, Bernie Sanders is building a movement of many races, of white people and African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, gay and straight Americans, working class and middle class Americans, even some people that have decent standards of living outside of the 1% are lining up behind Bernie Sanders. Bernie is building a movement that is extremely broad, that is extremely diverse, that is based in the multifaceted experience of American life, and Bernie Sanders is terrifying people because of it. This is something that even Bernie couldn't do 4 years ago. Bernie Sanders always had more diversity, always had more complexity in his movement than the lies about him showed. The Bernie bro lie was always there, and it obscured the fact that Bernie had support amongst women and people of color and older people, and on and on and on. But back then, Bernie Sanders' movement was smaller and less diverse than it is right now. The Bernie Sanders of 2019-2020 is even more powerful, is even more inspirational, is even more terrifying to the rich and wealthy and well-connected than Bernie was 4 years ago. Because Bernie Sanders has built a movement. He's built an apparatus. Bernie Sanders right now is being occupied by the impeachment trial. Like a lot of other senators, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, etc. That's important work, and Bernie's happy to do it, but it does take him away from Iowa during the week. But because Bernie Sanders has built a movement, because Bernie Sanders now has powerful allies like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who can draw crowds of 6,000 people for Bernie Sanders in Iowa, as she did this weekend, Bernie Sanders knows that his movement is growing not just in terms of its, height, but its width. It's not just about Bernie anymore. Bernie never wanted it to be just about him. But in 2015, 2016, it was mostly about Bernie because almost no one else was supporting him, except for regular people. This time, Bernie Sanders has major support from progressives in the Democratic Party and outside of it. And those people are helping to build a movement that is truly striking fear in the hearts of the rich and wealthy and well-connected. The biggest companies, the biggest voices in the Republican and Democratic Party. This is a watershed moment. The polls, be they early state polls, be they Super Tuesday polls, be they national polls, are moving in Bernie's direction. Some of them have him in the lead. Some of them have him catching up on Joe Biden a little bit each and every day. In any case, Bernie Sanders is moving in the right way. National polls in a hypothetical matchup versus Trump often have Bernie Sanders beating Trump. He almost always beats Trump, but he often beats Trump by more than anybody else in the field, sometimes more than Joe Biden. At the end of the day, Bernie Sanders is showing that he has real strength. It's scaring the elite. And it's at this moment that we realize that every single day, because the attacks on Bernie Sanders supporters, on Bernie Sanders surrogates, on everyone who believes in that vision for American society, and even us internationally who believe that Bernie Sanders will build a better international community, we are going to be under attack. And it's time that we stick together. We show solidarity with one another. We show understanding with one another, because we cannot break at this crucial interval. Bernie Sanders needs the support of regular working class and middle class people. If he loses it at this moment, a lot of the hard work, the momentum, the fight will have been for nothing. In this moment, the neoliberal press will ramp up their attacks. They'll ramp up their lies. They'll ramp up their miscontextualized quotes of Bernie. They'll do whatever they can, however they can, wherever they can to stop him, because he is their worst nightmare. And his movement, all of us, we are their worst nightmare. So keep all of that in mind. Keep all of that in mind as you get that final push in Iowa and New Hampshire, and you get ready for the longer fight, because Bernie Sanders is going to win this. And the regular mainstream media, they cannot handle it. So when you see them having conniptions on social media, on the TV, in the print media, on their websites, know that that's the motivation you need, that we're on the right track, we're pushing forward, and that the worst nightmare for them is the American dream for everybody else.